Greetings, everyone. By now you've gone through, I hope, all 4 of the previous segments of this second module in the Arts and Culture of Asia. We finished our final segment of these video lectures that with a discussion of time and materiality in the arts and how we can understand how even art forms that we usually associate with being durable can be quite ephemeral. So do go back and review all 4 of those videos if you have not done so already. You can certainly watch this now. This is not necessarily a sequential video following those 4, but those 4 are to be watched together, and this is separate. And this may be broken up into 2. We'll see how I do with the 15-minute limit with YouTube videos. My apologies again for that. There's really no other way around it at this time for me. Maybe I'll become more skilled in instructional design and find a way. So let me share my slides with you. So excuse me while I do that. So, share screen. Play from current slide. Okay. All right, so you should be seeing the title page of this this discussion and video of the the elements of visual analysis. So that's the purpose of this video and discussion lecture, if you will, is to examine forms of visual analysis and how we go about looking and then understanding what we see in a work of art, both with our intrinsic sensibilities through a sight and other senses that are triggered through the act of looking. And then in the second half or second segment, the way in which an understanding of content and context, an understanding of content goes deeper than just our own sense experience and is informed by a close look at context. And then we will trace this through primarily through one work of Japanese art, which we see a fraction of here below. Again, because I'm using these introductory segments to expose you to as much Asian art as possible without confusing you, you see here at the top, juxtaposed against the Japanese screen, partial view of the Japanese screen below, is a partial view of Krishna holding up Mount Govardhan to shelter the villagers of Braj. And this is from the Hindu epics, which are literature, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. And so we would understand this image of Krishna in relation both to the terms of formal analysis we'll be applying to the Japanese work below, but also obviously to understand this work up at the top, we would want to read those texts, which is a form of contextual analysis. And that's really at the heart of much of what this class will be doing as we anchor around a chronological approach to the study of Asian art and its interconnectedness and its developments. So in our last segments, I introduced you to the humanities and the arts, and you might remember from the slide in the first segment of our last of a 4-unit segment of a discussion of the arts and the humanities, we identified the branches of the arts. And here I've highlighted or bolded visual art, and that's what we'll be focusing on, not architecture, not drama, not music, not literature, not film, but visual art. That shall be our focus. I am not going to identify the object, the painting other than it's Japanese for the moment, so that we can move slowly into it using the principles of formal analysis to reveal as much as we can without knowing many facts other than it's a Japanese screen painting together. So the visual arts use different methods of representation, but actually use different methods in general. And the method of representation itself is an ancient function of visual art in which the likeness of an object or life form is produced. So I began by phrasing things a little incorrectly. The visual arts use many different methods. Among them is representation, as it is defined by capturing a likeness. Like a portrait of me, if it looks a little bit like me, is a representation of me. Artists use different methods to represent a subject. We define a subject as that which is actually depicted. A portrait, a landscape, a still life are all, a still life is a vase with flowers or a bowl of fruit is the classic example, are examples of subjects. The subject of this 17th century Japanese painting is a portrait of a Zen master, Kyuzan Sei. And Japanese students, if you are in my class, I think there are a few of you, I welcome corrections to my pronunciation sent as little MP3s or video clips if you're so inclined. My pronunciation is not good and I'm sorry. So the image of the Zen master is an example of what we call a Shinso portrait, where naturalistic facial details reflect their attainment of enlightenment. So the actual representation of the Zen master, and here we can see his face, is very finely detailed, but it's also designed to express the transformation or the process of a Zen a practitioner of Zen Buddhism and his or her enlightenment, which is, to put it crudely, an increasing detachment from attachments, particularly in the material world, so as to love it as fully as possible and without any attachment to it. So we'll learn a lot more about that when we study the passage of Buddhism, its fundamental principles, and its movement up into China and eventually into Japan, where it takes on the shape of Zen Buddhism, which is a very particular articulation of it. The portrait is a testimony to a Zen master's disciples' participation in the lineage of Buddhist law. And so there is a expression of identity to some degree and place in a system aligned to a Zen Buddhist structure and way of life. The subject of this 13th century Chinese painting is nature, a parrot, an insect, and pear blossoms. So once again here, then we look at this parrot, which is rendered in very fine detail. And then here, I should have had arrows, is an insect, and that insect is right here. Obviously, we see the parrot. And we call this kind of painting realistic because it is intended to represent the features of the subject depicted. This looks clearly like a parrot. Maybe there is some stylistic departures, but it is, we wouldn't mistake it for, I don't know, a hummingbird, for example. And these are clearly blossoms. And if you know pear trees, you might say they definitely look like sufficiently like representations of pear blossoms. And likewise, this insect, which I'm not sure what kind of insect it is, but I've seen them, but I don't know their names in my own home. Realistic representation. Artists use many different methods of representation. So we just saw an example of realistic. If the subject is accurately depicted and readily recognizable, we call the work realistic. We already rather talked about that a moment ago, but we'll look again. These are understood to be realistic. This is a portrait of a Zen disciple, his world, his relation to a temple structure and a master, and his attainment of a level of enlightenment is all a realistic portrayal, as are his garments and his. And then we have a realistic representation to the right. Not to say we don't see many ways in which this departs from reality, but again, this comes back to intention, as we talked about in our previous segments. So much about the study of the arts is this dynamic between our experience of a work of art and understanding the intention of the artist, or the intentions of a society or patron that inform a work of art. Abstract representation, what is that? Well, if a work is abstracted, we can understand the work to be recognizable, but that it does not seek to be an accurate representation of the subject as it would appear in the natural world. I like to think of chess players on a chessboard. We know who the pawn is and the queen and the king, but only on very particular chessboards are they rendered with a high level of realistic detail. We know who they are because their forms are somewhat abstracted. This sculpture brings us to what will be the very beginning of our class once we are complete with our introduction and our exposure to terms. This sculpture is entitled Seated Mother Goddess from the Indus Valley Civilization. And I'm sorry, there's a little comma there that should be after the second S. And it is an abstract representation of the female form. We say abstract because we can tell it's a woman with the very full breasts and the hips and the feminine waves of hair, but a great deal of her body has been reduced and abstracted to simplified form so that we recognize it's a female form, but we also recognize it's not intended to represent a specific person, or even an accurate representation of a human woman fully, but an abstracted representation. And I'll just quickly say, this is, as the text reads, it's from the Indus Valley Civilization, and this is the beginning of our study in this class. We'll begin with the ancient works of the Indus Valley Civilization. And there's a lot of, unfortunately, a second typo. I'm quite sorry, this 0 should not be there. So it's 3000 to 2500 BC. And I'll correct this when I download the PowerPoint that use into Canvas. What we're looking at to the left here is another Indus Valley goddess, and this is even older than the one we just looked at, and she is even more abstracted. Her head and her nose are reduced to the barest of flat discs, spiraling, and perhaps a nose, perhaps here, and then the barest contours of a feminine silhouette. It was certainly an abstracted form. On the right, we're going quite a bit forward in time, still in India. This is a Hindu guardian type, a door guardian from the 4th century, so much, much later than this work, which is from 3500 BCE to maybe 3000. So about 4,000 years later, we have a very realistic representation of a guardian figure here. And we can say it's realistic because it looks like someone. And it has details that suggest that it is an individual. It's not a portrait, but it looks like an individual person. So we call that representational. And this actually is in the Pakistan ancient region of Gandhara. And curiously, it's a Hindu guardian type, but it's guarding a Buddhist monastery. And that's a separate subject of the cross-fertilization of aesthetics and belief systems and values that we see in this very rich area of Asia. We call a work of art non-objective when there is no longer a recognizable subject at all. The subject of this work by a contemporary Indonesian artist, Etang Wiharasu or Wiharsu, I don't know how his last name is pronounced, is non-objective. The title is in small text down here, Art History, Indonesian Diaspora. And so we have a sequence of vertical rectangular forms, and they are non-objective. So we would have time together later in the class to talk about how to make meaning about this. So that is the first segment of this discussion of formal analysis. And I'm going to come back in just a moment and look at pictorial space and the picture plane as our next segment in this unit. So I'll see you all soon. Okay, so say goodbye.